Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Freethink COVID vaccine Q&A. I'm just going to search for Kennen. Let's see if we can get him. Hi, everybody. Welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, what's going on, Kennen?
Not too much. How are you doing this morning?
I'm good. Good morning. Excited for our COVID vaccine chat.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Are you ready for it?
I'm so ready. I thought we might start by just doing a brief intro to each of us. I don't know how many are following here who know me or who know you, but I thought I'll do a quick intro of myself, and then maybe you can tell people a little bit about your background and why we're having this conversation today.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like a logical thing.
Yeah. So I'll start. I'm Daisy Robinton. I am a scientist and molecular and cellular biologist. I did a PhD at Harvard University in translational medicine. So I studied basic biology and then how you take biology from the lab into a clinical setting. And I, like Kennen, have done a lot of communication of science over the last year, basically focused on COVID-19 and before that and many other topics. And today we have the great pleasure of chatting with Kennen, who has more of a virology background, and I'll let him take it off from there.
Well, thank you. I'm a fourth year PhD student at Northwestern, where I work in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology. I focus on neuroinvasive herpes viruses, but neuroinvasive viruses in general, so viruses that get into your brain.
Mm.
Outside of that, though, I've been doing a lot of science communication similar to you. I started a company called Science with Kennen, where we've covered all sorts of topics from why the sky is blue to more recently the history of viruses and a lot of COVID stuff. And then I also teach science for a school called Dexter School. So I get a lot of healthy science in my life.
Awesome. And as we both know, science communication right now is more important than ever. And so many of these topics can be quite confusing. And, I like to chat with a lot of my friends about what's going on in the world, but also reminding people, like, we don't expect everyone to be a scientist. And both of us have been studying science very aggressively for years and years and years. And I think one of the great things about ScienceCom is that it's fun to chat with people and break things down in a way that's approachable and really just meet people where they are and answer some questions. So with that, I think we can dive right in. We have a lot to cover. And, we'll be looking also at the comments if you guys have any comments out there. And I guess we'll just get started. So, we have a couple of vaccines that are now moving forward and are being used in humans. And the two front runners are both mRNA vaccines. So maybe we can just start by talking about what an mRNA vaccine is.
Yeah, definitely. I am super excited about this. I keep telling people that the mRNA vaccines are like the new iPhones of vaccine development, right? So if you think like when you get a new iPhone, they've got a new camera on it or a new operating system, but you still know it's going to work because it's a phone. And that's kind of the same with these mRNA vaccines, that it's still vaccine technology. Vaccine works the same way across all vaccines. You're essentially trying to give your body something to practice against so that when it sees a real disease, it will be able to fight it off really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so these mRNA vaccines, what's really cool about them is that in the past, we've done this by using like putting live virus inside of you or killing a version of a virus and putting it inside of you, which arguably it works, but like nobody really likes the thought of having a virus put inside of them, right?
Yeah.
And so these mRNA vaccines essentially is we've used science to copy how a virus might work. So a virus is really just a piece of genetic material wrapped inside of a little bubble. That's all a virus is. And so what we've done is we've been able to just take one protein, which is encoded by this genetic piece of information called an mRNA,
Mm-hmm.
and put it in this thing called a lipid nanoparticle, which is just a little bubble of fat. And so essentially, we deliver that to your cells. And so instead of a whole virus with all of the virus's DNA in there that can make you really sick getting into you and replicating, instead it's just this one protein of the virus that gets in, does the same thing and pretends that you're getting infected, but really it's not an infection. So you get a good immune response, which is what I'm actually most excited about, is that a lot of times you don't get a good immune response, so you have to use these things called adjuvants, which people hear about, right? So like aluminum salts or squalene. You don't need that because when you have a natural infection, you build a good immune response, and that's what we see with these vaccines. So we're faking a viral infection with just a single protein instead of the 28 that COVID has, I think, or SARS-CoV-2 has.
Yeah.
And then elicit an immune response.
Yeah, and I think what's cool about that too is, like you mentioned, a virus requires many tools to actually assemble itself in the body. And like you said, this is just one of the tools in its toolbox. So the rest of it's not really there. I mean, one question that I get a lot from people, maybe just I'll ask you just for extreme clarity, even though you've covered this a bit, is could a person get COVID from this vaccine?
Yeah, I've gotten this question a lot as well. And so the answer is no, not at all. It's not even a chance with these vaccines. With things like the live attenuated flu virus, sure, you're giving a live virus, but this is not. It's just a single protein which doesn't have the ability to replicate or make new versions of it, so you're not getting an infection.
Right. Cool. Okay, so let's move on from there. One of the things that we get a lot of questions about is the speed with which we've gotten this vaccine. Previously, the fastest vaccine that's been developed was for the mumps, which was, I believe, 4 years of development. So can you talk a little bit about what enabled the COVID vaccine itself to be developed faster than this?
Yeah. So the mumps vaccine is pretty fun, and the same reason that the mumps vaccine was able to be made so quickly is the same reason that this vaccine. Yeah. Yay! Well, so the mumps vaccine was actually built on new technology, and so oh, now I'm gonna have a mind fart. I'm not gonna be able to give a good shout out to who it was, but essentially, two scientists way back in like the 40s discovered that you could grow viruses in chicken eggs. And so by being able to do this, you could scale up the virus and then you could inactivate it and deliver it. So that's how we made the polio vaccine. It's actually how we make the live attenuated flu viruses and the inactivated flu viruses now. So essentially what happened, the story of mumps, is this scientist, his daughter got mumps and he isolated it. His daughter's name was Geraldine, I believe, which is why the mumps strain is called the Geraldine strain. But he isolated it and he was like, I think I can.
After me.
Yeah. Well, he's like, I think I can grow this using these technologies. And so he put it into these chick eggs and then went through the process of essentially piggybacking on technology that was already out there to make the mumps vaccine. And that's pretty much what we've done here. So mumps was a problem in World War I for it's really detrimental to adults who get it. And so when we had soldiers who were getting it, we were like, it's a problem. But then after the war, we're like, okay, well, I guess it's not that big of a problem.
Yeah.
Enter SARS research. 2003, we had a SARS outbreak. So the original SARS virus, like 12% lethal, much more dangerous than this one was in terms of if you got it, you were more likely to die. However, it wasn't as infectious as this one, but we knew it was a problem. And so starting from that epidemic or pandemic, they're like, all right, we need to be prepared. And so they started working on these vaccines all the way back since 2003. And then we had the MERS outbreak in 2012. So we've kind of been, and then the nice thing about these viruses is they all still have this spike protein. So the spike, the fundamental protein is going to be the same. There's going to be regions that change that increase its ability to bind and infect you. But we've been working on this same protein type vaccine since 2003. And mRNA technology has been around for almost 30 years. We've been trying it. The biggest problem was it used to elicit an immune response in you. And then we had, oh man, I'm so bad at names. Oh, I'm not even going to try to mangle it. So a scientist essentially found out that if you could use synthetic nucleosides inside of it, you can make a synthetic version of mRNA that doesn't cause you to have an immune response, which just opened the windows to all of the things that you could do with it. So maybe essentially there's been...
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so just like the background of these not being made too fast is that the works for these have been, or the science for this has been in the works for over 30 years, and specifically for the SARS viruses for since 2003, so the last 13 years. And then once it came time for this virus to come out, we had the technology that we could like insert it into there and be like, all right, we know the tools, we know the tests that we need to run to make sure that these things are safe and effective. We've been studying this for the last 17 years. Let's see if we can do this with this virus. And that's essentially what they did. And the biggest thing that allowed these vaccines to come out so quickly compared to 4 years is there was just a whole national attention on this, right? So Operation Warp Speed dumped billions of dollars into the vaccine development process, which is a huge holdup. Normally companies are fundraising at each step. So you have to go through preclinical trials, then 3 phases of clinical trials, and then apply for a new drug application. All of that takes money. So most of the time, since like 9 out of 10 drugs don't succeed.
And also,
Investors
I'll
don't
just
want
say,
to.
we had to go through all of these steps with this as well. We didn't skip any of those steps. They just essentially were expedited, partly because the whole world is trying to get a vaccine out, and so it just went to the front of the line. Whereas there's always a ton of things in that pipeline of how do we make a drug, basically. And I know
Yeah.
you're getting into this now, but I'd love to hear a little bit, like if you can expand a bit on how, like what is the process of making a vaccine itself, and how that's maybe shifted with COVID in particular.
Yeah. So in general, what happens is you're going to develop a vaccine, you find a candidate that's going to work, and then you test it in animal trials. So these are called preclinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
So you make sure you find dosage, you find that it's safe and effective inside of animals, and then you're going to hope that that translates to humans.
Mm-hmm.
And so the next thing that you do once you have these positive results from your animal trials is you apply for something called an investigational new drug application, or an IND.
Mm-hmm.
So once you have an IND, then essentially the FDA will review your animal trials. If it looks safe, then you get to move on into clinical trials. And there's 3 phases of clinical trials. So the first phase is all about safety. Don't even care if the drug works. We just take healthy individuals, a handful of healthy individuals, and give them the drug at different doses to make sure that none of those doses are going to make them sick. If they are, we get rid of that, and we find the doses that are safe for people to use.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say like 80% of drugs, 60 to 80% of drugs will make it past the safety phase.
Yeah. So
then the next phase is you move it into phase 2 clinical trials, where you're looking for both safety still. Safety is the most important thing, but then also, is it effective?
Mm-hmm.
This is normally in like a couple thousand people, 100 to 1,000 of people. You give them the drug at the dose that you found was safe in phase 1. And then you're going to look to see, does the drug actually work? So in the case of vaccines, does it actually stop you from getting really sick?
Mm-hmm.
Bonus, does it actually stop you from even getting infected at all? And then at the same time, with more people getting this vaccine, is it safe in them? Are there any effects that are coming up?
Mm-hmm.
And then once you pass that information, then you move on to phase 3, which is a large study. It's the same thing as phase 2. You're still looking for safety. You're still looking for efficacy, but now it's in a large group of people. So typical drugs only do like 3,000. What's really crazy about these vaccines is that Moderna's had like 30,000. I think Pfizer's was like 43 or something like that. So so many people are being exposed to these vaccines. So we have a huge number of to get if these vaccines are safe and effective.
Yeah.
And so phase 3 is the same. You look to see, is the drug working? More people, are more of them having like weird effects, weird sicknesses? And if they don't, then you move it on to the FDA for what's called a biological license application, or drugs will do a new drug application, an NDA or a BLA. And the FDA then reviews that. You'll have other places will do external reviews. And if it gets approved and we show that the drug is safe, it's effective, and the risk of the drug are lower than the risk of the actual disease, then it gets approved. And then there's still follow-up data.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with these drugs, these vaccines, they've still gone through the same steps. They've still done preclinical data. They've still done phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 data. They actually get even more reviews. So the CDC reviewed it. The FDA has an advisory review panel. There's an auxiliary review panel that looks through these. And then I know even the state of California hired their own experts to look at all of this data. So there's been so many. New York did too?
I think so, yeah. And I think, that's a really good point of, I know a lot of folks are concerned about like, who are we trusting? Are we trusting the government to figure it out? And like who's really reviewing these? And I think it's a great thing to say that there's a lot of eyeballs on these from people that are government officials, but also a ton of independent scientists that aren't at all linked to politics, as it were, which is comforting for me.
Yeah. I mean, I feel the same way. People started swaying me like, well, do you trust the government? I'm like, well, they have been sketchy in the past, but I do trust these external professors.
Yeah. And I think that's critical. And, certainly part of the scientific process and any sort of drug development is also this independent review and being really clear about when interests are sort of conflicted and making sure that you can get neutral people to really look at the data. I hear a lot of people question like who or how do I trust, and ultimately for me I'm always like, the data are available and there's lots of people who can look at the data and make their own assessments, and so data kind of speak for themselves, and as scientists we of course know that you weight data differently based on like how an experiment's designed and all that. But I think what's comforting is knowing that there's a lot of people reviewing that who don't have vested interest in it, which I think is really important to convey widely. I do have another question.
Something else that's cool.
Oh yeah.
I was just going to say something else that's been really cool about this is that the commitment to transparency that everybody's had. So all of this data, as you were saying, is all publicly accessible. You can look through the papers, look through the review. If you wanted to, I did for both the Pfizer and the Moderna FDA's advisory committee, they live streamed that. So you could sit through 7 hours of very educated scientists actually talking about the pros and cons of all these things. So all of that transparency has been really cool.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome also. So we've seen that the efficacy for these vaccines is 90% and higher. Can you speak a little bit to what that actually means, and maybe also touch on the difference between efficacy and effectiveness?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's an important question. So I've heard some people convolute this with thinking like it's going to protect you from getting infected 95% of the time, which is not what that means. So efficacy is essentially a simple equation is you look at how many people who got the vaccine ended up getting sick with the disease versus how many people who didn't. And then you take that as a fraction and subtract it from 100 to give you a percentage. So essentially it's saying 95% efficacy means that out of 100 people who get the vaccine, 95 of them are going to be protected. That's what it's saying. So there's going to be 5% that the vaccine just doesn't take for various reasons. When it comes to safety efficacy versus effectiveness, that's really just semantics of where you're studying this at. So efficacy is going to be in a lab condition, in a controlled double-blinded study. How well does this vaccine work? So in near perfect conditions, whereas effectiveness is in real life application, how effective is this vaccine? So how many people are actually going to come in to get 2 doses of the vaccine, which we need right now? How many people are going to be protecting themselves and continuing to wear masks and stuff for the 2 weeks after the second dose that it takes to get optimal protection? So these things are real world factors that can lower the actual effectiveness of the drug just because it's not being followed by what we would do in the lab setting.
Yeah. And maybe you can expand a little bit also on the dosing schedule. So we know that you're supposed to get 2 doses. Can you tell us why we need that, and maybe even what the difference is between 1 and 2, and just expand on that a bit more?
Yeah. So the first dose we just refer to as like a priming dose, and then the second dose is a booster. And essentially what that does is you're going to be exposed to the vaccine. Your immune system's going to do its job, and it's going to create antibodies and create these things called B cells and T cells, which are your immune cells that are actually recognizing the virus. But the first time you get exposed, it may not give you, it'll give you a response. You'll probably feel some aches and pains as your immune system does what it does. But let's say that response is 70% of your maximum response. So what we do is we come back and we give you a booster, which is we're just exposing you again. So your immune system's already been trained to what it looks like. And this time it's like, oh, we know how to kick its butt. It's a second round of practice, and that'll take you up to your 100% optimal antibody production. So you'll have these things called neutralizing antibodies, which just means that you'll have enough weapons running around your bloodstream that if the virus comes in, it can quickly bind it and stop it from even infecting you. And then you'll also have this really robust response with these memory B cells and T cells, which should, in theory, stay with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah, so maybe you can expand a bit on when you get this vaccine, or even if you've had COVID and you have some of those tools available to you, what's the difference between having immunity and having resistance? And maybe just talking a little bit about, if I get the vaccine, is it possible for me to get COVID, or what's living in that space that needs to be talked about and people need to understand?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think a lot of times, I'm guilty of this as well, used to think that like you get a vaccine and that just makes you invincible, right? Like you got it, the virus just like bounces off of you, you can't get infected with it, which is not how it works. So in order for you to build immunity, the vaccine is imitating an infection so that your body has this system of warriors, your immune system, an army, that when they see something bad, they attack it and they get rid of it. But in order for your immune system to work, of course, they actually have to see what's bad, the pathogen. So your immune system isn't just blocking things from getting into you. Essentially, the virus still gets into you, and it'll start doing its job. It's going to try to outrace your immune system to infect all of these cells, and it's your immune system's job to recognize what's being infected and to stop it. So if your immune system works really well, it'll recognize the viruses inside of you before it has a chance to like really start making more viruses and making you sick. And in that case, then you are kind of invincible, right? Your immune system crushes the virus before you can spread it.
Right.
But sometimes it'll take a while. If the virus is sneaky, it'll hide and it'll start to replicate, and you might actually still be infectious for a few days before your immune system recognizes it and is able to eliminate all of those viruses, in which case you're immune because you're not going to get really sick, but you're not invincible because there's still a little bit of viruses that's inside of you before your body clears it out.
Yeah, and I really think that last part is super important, and it's a thing I've chatted a lot about with many of my friends who are also immunologists and virologists, is what is really the likelihood of having, if you've either had the vaccine or if you've had COVID, that you might be able to spread it to others even if you're not sick. So I do think that, you know, there's so much that we need to learn, and there are so few things that we've studied in such great detail and so rapidly. And you know, I had COVID back in March, and one of the questions that I've had is there, if I'm sitting next to someone who happens to have COVID and we're not wearing masks and they're coughing at me and I'm receiving doses, is there a chance in the next few days while my body's mounting its immune response that it's primed to do, that I might be able to spread it to someone else? So I do think, just as like a little PSA, you know, I certainly am still taking all the normal precautions that we're taking around the world, mask wearing and social distancing and everything, but just also acknowledging that just because you won't get sick doesn't mean you're not a possible vector of disease, even though it's unlikely. And that's of course like why we're doing the vaccine. It just really reduces the likelihood of that happening. So I do think that's an important day.
I agree. And I think depending upon how long we continue these studies going, I know there's been talk about unblinding, which makes it a little bit more difficult, but that's a question that we are actively investigating. So the only question that we've answered right now with these vaccines is, does the vaccine reduce disease? And it does. Unequivocally, that's what the data shows. The next question that we're asking is, does the vaccine reduce spread or infectiousness? And that's what you are getting at there. So until we have the answers, I always say when it comes to your health, it's always better to be safe than sorry. So that's why we still say, yeah, wear masks, social distance, even after you've gotten the vaccine, just because until that we know that that's a true factor, then it would still be real. I at least personally feel it'd be really terrible if like I get the vaccine, I think that I'm okay, and I spread it to somebody else whose grandma dies or something like that. Like that would make me feel horrible.
Totally.
So until we know, just wear masks for a little bit longer, and then eventually enough people will be vaccinated that we won't have to worry about that, because even if the virus still can spread, it just isn't going to cause severe disease in people.
Yeah, maybe you can speak a little bit more to that herd immunity concept. Maybe explain what herd immunity is and how many people we'd really need to have the vaccine in order for that to be something that we reach.
Yeah, I guess first and foremost is herd immunity is a term that was invented and only applies to vaccination. So I know I've heard people talking about like natural herd immunity. That's not an actual term or word in science. It's a really terrible concept to think that like, let's just let enough people just get sick and some of them die before we're protected. Herd immunity is all about developing immune system. So enough people are protected from the vaccine and enough people are protected from severe disease that if the virus gets into you, it doesn't have long enough to spread to other people. And so you calculate herd immunity based on something called an R naught, which is how infectious the virus is essentially. So this virus has an R naught of about 3 roughly. So for every one person who gets infected, they'll spread it to 3 other people is what that means.
Right.
And so to calculate herd immunity, it's just the percentage, so 1 minus 1 over 3 in this case. So 1/3 is 33%, which means that it would be roughly 66% of the population needs to be vaccinated, needs to be immune to the virus before we have some sort of herd immunity to protect it. I think, and of course, the higher you are in that number, the more protection you're going to have. So there's always going to be 5 to 10% of the population who just can't get vaccinated. And the altruistic thing is like you get vaccinated so that we have herd immunity so that those people are still protected by you being protected.
Yeah, I think that last bit is actually such an important concept to cover. And you know, I've been a proponent of flu vaccines forever. I have two siblings who have health issues that make it difficult for their immune systems to be really functional. And I see we have a handful of comments from people as well asking for advice for friends and family. Maybe I'll start by saying that neither of us is medical doctors, so we can't provide medical advice whatsoever. We're scientists, and so we
Yes.
stick to the science. And of course, I encourage you to speak to doctors with an MD to get advice on care. But I think this concept of not everyone can get a vaccine is actually just a quick one to underscore that's important. There are people who are unable to get vaccines, or you know, maybe the vaccine won't be as effective in them. So maybe if you have any more to sort of comment on there, Kennen, just to color that in a little bit more and explain why it's important for, you know, someone like you and me. We're healthy people. It's like pretty easy for us to get the vaccine. Maybe just expand on that a little.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head with that, and it ties directly into herd immunity. So as more people are protected, there's less virus that's being spread around, and less virus means less people are being exposed. So if you can be a part of that, then that's a good thing. I'm not gonna say it's your responsibility. It's always your choice.
Yeah.
But like that's why we do it. You and I are healthy people. If we can stop it from being spread to, say, somebody who has an autoimmune disease, and so they're on immunosuppressants, or somebody who has cancer and they're on chemotherapy, so they need to be on, or transplants, anything that where your immune system is hindered, right? That's a big reason. That's a large population of people who are often advised against getting vaccines.
Yeah.
With these vaccines, I know they're still doing the research, but even with people who are on immunosuppressants, they are still saying, you know, talk to your doctor, talk to whoever is in control of your treatment, but we don't not recommend the vaccine. But the flip side of that is that if your immune system isn't as strong, the whole point of a vaccine is to give an immune response. So if your immune system's turned down, you might not get as good of a response. And so you're going to be added to that maybe 5% of people who the vaccine doesn't work for, just because you don't have as good a protection as, or whoever doesn't have as good of immune response doesn't have good of protection as you or I, who have very functional immune systems.
Yeah.
So.
And so maybe this seems relevant here as well. Obviously, there's side effects with pretty much anything one does at any time. And so can you talk a little bit about the side effects that we've observed from these vaccines, and maybe how common those are in general and in vaccines and in these ones in particular? Just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I made a video about this because this is, as a scientist who, like, we study these things, I always get so, I'm going to say like the millennial word of like triggered, when people are like, oh, side effects of like fever, aches, like soreness. These are not side effects so much as they are symptoms or on target effects. So just like the example I use is if you've ever taken like a chloroseptic, like to numb your throat, or you've taken like X-Lax, right, to like move your bowels.
Yeah.
You're not going to say that like if your throat gets numb or you start having a bowel movement that like the drug is having a side effect. That's what you want to happen.
Yeah.
And so with a vaccine, it's the exact same. What you want to happen is you want to elicit an immune response. Your immune system needs to train, and there's things that you can expect to happen when your immune system's working, which first and foremost, you're getting a shot. So pain at the site of injection, yeah, you had something sharp poked into you. If you get swelling and redness there, that's caused by your immune system, or there's cells that travel through your bloodstream. So at the site of where the things are going on, you're going to have a lot of blood that's rushing there, bringing immune cells. And as more blood builds up in there, it's going to start to swell. Blood's also red, so you're going to start seeing redness in that site. That's why you have pain and redness. We just call this inflammation. It's a good thing when it's controlled. Also, the cells that are getting infected, that are expressing these viruses, these viral proteins, they'll start to release these things called cytokines, and like some of your immune systems will release them. And these are just essentially signals that run through the rest of your body saying, hey, let's bring some more immune cells in. But they can leave you feeling, since they're running through your whole body, they can leave you feeling a little achy and like give you some joint pain, some headaches maybe. So these things are also expected. This is your immune system working. And then the other thing, and I'm actually listing these off in like the most common symptoms that you'll get with this vaccine, is fever and chills. And so the reason that your body raises its temperature is two things. By raising the temperature, once you get to a certain temperature, viruses and bacteria often will have a harder time growing. So raising the temperature will slow them from actually being able to produce in your body, but it also allows your immune cells to work a little bit faster and a little bit better. So it makes your immune system better and the infection worse. So that's why you get a fever, and a good way to raise your temperature is by moving. And when you're moving, you're creating energy, you're shivering, and that helps to raise your body. So aches and pains, general soreness, redness at the right site of infection, and maybe some fever or chills are things to be expected if your immune system's working. Of course, if this lasts for more than 3 days or 3 or 4 days, talk to your doctor. If it's severe, you've got like 104-degree temperature, which I haven't heard any reports of that, talk to your doctor. That's a severe adverse reaction. But outside of that, these are just signs that your immune system's working. And then severe adverse effects, the majority of what we've heard has been anaphylactic shock. So right now, these vaccines aren't recommended if you've ever had an allergic reaction to a vaccine, just because allergic reactions, they're a thing, right? Like when I was a kid, I was allergic to wheat and yeast. So my doctor was like, don't eat pizza because you might end up having like an asthma attack. Luckily, I grew out of that. But it's the same for these vaccines, right? So talk to your doctor. All of these anaphylactic shocks or anaphylactic reactions have been treated. Nobody's died from them. They're reversible, and they happen normally within the first like 15 to 45 minutes, which is why after you get the shot, you normally sit in a waiting room for 30 minutes afterwards.
Oh, that's great info. Now, I know you've gotten this question a lot. I certainly have. People who've asked, which vaccine would you like to get if you got the choice? Not like there's a shortage.
Well, I mean, the real answer is whichever one they're going to give to me. They both seem equally effective. They both seem equally safe to me. I've personally been rooting for the Moderna vaccine since the beginning. They're just kind of like the small company who really took advantage of this mRNA technology. They've got a bunch of other mRNA vaccines in the works. So I'm excited about what they have to offer. But in terms of which vaccine to get, either or. I mean, I just want to be vaccinated. There's some differences between the two. If we want to talk about that, I don't know if anybody's curious about those.
Maybe a little bit, yeah.
So like the biggest differences between them are going to be their storage and their wait period. So I guess we talk about wait period first. We talked about you'll need 2 doses. So with the Pfizer vaccine, part of the reason it was released first before Moderna is that the wait time between the second dose is 21 days, so 3 weeks, whereas Moderna's is 28 days, so 4 weeks. So in theory, you could have optimal protection within, 5 weeks total? So you get your first vaccine, 3 weeks later, you get your second vaccine, and then 2 weeks after that, you have optimal protection. So versus 6 weeks, a whole nother week of waiting with the Moderna vaccine. But on the flip side, Moderna's is much more convenient for use just in general. When it's shipped around, it can be shipped around at minus 20 degrees versus Pfizer's needs to be shipped at minus 70. And the Moderna vaccine is more stable at temperature. So you can store it in the fridge for up to a month, 30 days, and leave it at room temperature for 12 hours, which is good because it carries 10 doses in there. So essentially you can inoculate 10 people, or immunize is the right word, immunize 10 people within a 12-hour phase without having to worry about the vaccine going off. Versus the Pfizer's is a little bit more fragile, but either way, 94% plus effectiveness.
And then just because I saw a couple questions in the comments while we were chatting throughout this chat, I know we're at time. Maybe we'll just do 1 or 2 brief ones more if you have a couple of minutes. I've got nothing going on today. Okay, cool. So obviously the vaccine is sort of mimicking the body's natural response to infection. Can you compare the immunity that you might get from getting COVID itself versus a vaccine and how those are different?
I think that this is potentially one of the most important questions, right? Because a lot of people have been infected with COVID. Last time I checked, it was like 16.2 million people in America.
I think 1 in 17 people in the U.S., it was reported by the Times today, has had COVID.
That's crazy. So if so many people have it, the question might be, why do I need to get a vaccine? And I think that there's 2 critical answers to this. The first is that the coronavirus infects us on a spectrum, right? You can be anywhere from asymptomatic to severe COVID, which could even include death, in which case you don't need a vaccine. More of a joke. But that also means that there's a spectrum of immune response that you're going to have. And so we don't know what a natural infection is going to give you for an immune response from person to person. And we do know that there are plenty of other coronaviruses out there. Most of them cause the common cold, and they only give you about 2 to 3 months worth of protection. So you get the cold multiple times because you get the coronavirus cold. It gives you immunity for about 2 months, and then you're able to get it again. And then even with the original SARS, it seemed to give you about maybe 2 years worth of protection. And people who had severe disease, so not asymptomatic, but severe disease. We don't know, which means that you could, if you're just walking around with natural immunity, it could go off and you could lose that tomorrow or a year from now. Whereas the vaccine is developed to give everybody the same immune response. So we're giving everybody the same dosage. So essentially we don't know how long it's going to protect you for now. The studies are still going. Officially, we can say 2 months. It seems anecdotally from now, at least 4 months. And as more time goes on, we can say it could be 4 months, 4 years, 40 years, who knows? But when we do know, then we can give everybody the same recommendation. So we can say, hey, it looks like this vaccine gives you optimal protection for 4 years. So every 4 years, you're going to need a booster, or 10 years, or 4 months. So every year you're going to need one, instead of you just guessing and then potentially getting sick with COVID or not being protected and passing it on to somebody else.
Yeah, the latter probably being more important. And also, just one other thing that I think I'll add to that is, obviously these are pretty controlled, the way we've developed the vaccine is all very specific and controlled. And so the dosing is, everyone's getting the same dosage, right? And if you're getting COVID, it's sort of unclear what your dose of COVID is, if you will. And certainly early reports were showing that how much COVID you were exposed to influenced the severity of your disease. So that also influences your immunity. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, I won't get the vaccine, I'll get COVID, it's hard to really say how effective that will be, because people are responding differently to it. You might be one of the unlucky ones who gets very ill. I was certainly super ill. There's obviously a lot of people hospitalized and dying. But you also we don't know what the response is for that. We don't know what the dose is. You can't control how much you're taking in. And the vaccine obviously is controlled 2 doses with a very specific amount of the little strand of mRNA that's in there to provoke a specific kind of response. So I do think that's an important point to clarify as well.
Yeah, and I love that. That brings me right into what my second point was going to be with your dosage and getting it naturally. So if you don't know how long you're protected for, and you're just going to assume natural infection, the long-term effects that we know about COVID right now are there are no long-term effects that we know about with the vaccine right now. There's been some reported cases of Bell's palsy, which is like partial paralysis, which usually resolves itself, but we don't even know if that's like, I was just reading something today. I want to say it's like 127 people in the United States get Bell's palsy just normally. So we don't know whether or not that the people who got it were in the vaccine arm. It was 3 in the vaccine arm, 1 in the placebo arm. So was it that they were just going to get it or not? Whereas COVID, we know, causes cardiovascular disease or damage. It causes lung damage. It's been linked to mental health problems. All of these, there's these long haulers who have chronic disease, and that's all from getting infected with a natural virus. The natural virus, we know, has a much higher chance of doing long-term damage. And so that's the other reason why getting a vaccine is good, is even if you've already been infected, why not get the immunity from something that doesn't give you these symptoms, so that you know that you're protected and you don't have to worry about getting infected again, perhaps, and who knows, having a stroke or heart attack 10 years down the line because your cardiovascular system's been weakened from having a natural infection.
Yeah, and also it's similar in that case to, what you're saying basically is, if you've had COVID, it would make sense to get the vaccine once it's more widely available. And this reminds me of the shingles vaccine. Of course, now chickenpox isn't really a thing in kids anymore, but it once was, and people who've had chickenpox, that virus lives in your body for a long time and comes back later as shingles. And so a lot of people, once, I forget what age it is, I think it's like 50 or 60, are recommended to get a shingles vaccine as basically a booster to remind your body you know, what that virus looks like so that you don't get shingles later. I had shingles, which was horrible. I wish
Yeah,
I
I'm
had
not
a booster.
envious.
I'm too young to be recommended that. So maybe, I don't know, is there anything more you'd say around booster shots and that? I mean, you kind of already
Yeah.
covered it.
I mean, just for curiosity's sake, did you have natural chickenpox as a kid?
Yeah, I got chicken pox when I was super young, and then I had shingles when I was 30 on my, luckily it was just my arm. Most people get it sort of across their sides or on their face, and it's extremely painful, and it can actually cause pretty serious damage to your body. So in that case, I was really lucky, but it was extraordinarily painful and also very confusing because I was 30. So I was like, what am I doing? What is this thing on me? And
Yeah, no, that's a good highlight of like natural infection, right? Because like most kids now get the actual vaccine against it, which is not going to give you as strong of a version of that virus. The chickenpox virus is a live attenuated virus, so it's a live virus, but it's very weak.
Yeah.
Versus like natural infection with chickenpox is, I mean, essentially it's just like it's a herpes virus. So it's the same as having a cold sore or something like that.
Right.
It's just waiting for you to get stressed or something to turn it on and be like, let's wake up and do this, because it's fully functional and alive. And so, yeah, you're more likely to have a shingles reactivation earlier than if you get the actual vaccine. And then that, of course, that booster, my aunt just got that. I think it's 50. But my aunt just got the booster. She's like, oh, it hurts so much.
Yeah, I
like,
heard it's not a pleasant one, but I promise it's better than shingles.
yes, that's exactly it. The risk versus the benefit.
Yeah, maybe I saw a couple questions about this. So before we jump off, I have two questions for you. One is if we can just maybe revisit the concept of if you get a vaccine, do you need to wear a mask? Or if you've had COVID, do you need to wear a mask? I think that's an important one just to visit quickly. And then after that, if there's any last thoughts that you have before signing off, that would be also great to hear. Anything else that you want to say that we didn't get to or that I didn't ask you or anything else?
Yeah, sure, certainly. So in terms of the mask, yes, still wear a mask for whether you've had COVID or whether you've gotten the vaccine. We don't have enough data is what it's all about. So again, this is a thing where it's better to be safe than sorry, because once you've been infected, sure, natural infection may give you immunity where you may not be getting infected again, but it could also result in you, even if it's 2 months down the line, getting infected asymptomatically. Your immune system is awesome and it's fighting this virus off, so you don't even recognize that you're infected. However, you could still be shedding virus and spreading it to other people who aren't as fortunate. So that's the whole point of the mask. A mask, the whole job of a mask, yeah, it has some effect at like blocking you from taking in particles, but its main purpose is to stop you from spreading. Same applies to the vaccine. We don't have enough data to know if the vaccine will completely stop you from being infectious. All data points at the very least shorten the window. So from you being infectious potentially for 10 days to being infectious for maybe 1 to 3 days. But until we know that for sure, a mask is the best way to just protect your neighbors. Actually, I guess that's all I had to say. I was going to carry on, but I think that's the most important thing. Yes, just keep wearing a mask.
Everyone do it.
Wear a mask until we hit herd immunity, until the numbers are all down. I know it's annoying, it's uncomfortable, but even though you can't see it, it's saving lives. It is.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for all of that great insight. If there's anything else that you want to touch on that we didn't get to, or maybe also just tell everyone who's watching where they can find you. I know you have posts about some of this stuff on your channel, so I'll give you a chance to give that out.
Thanks for that. I always forget. Social media is for fun for me. It's just a place to share information and meet other people. But yeah, if you want to learn more about this, as we said earlier, I'm a virologist, so I post a lot about science stuff. You can check me out at Kennen Hutchison. Also, if you want to see more like childish fun things, I have an account called Science with Kennen, which is where we talk about like why the sky's blue and how rockets work and stuff. But yeah, and if you have any other questions, I've recently had a lot of people who started following this account, so it's still very weird. But I love answering DMs, so I will try my best to personally answer any questions that you have. I don't know if you feel the same way, and if I can't, then I'll point you in the direction of someone who can, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Kennen. And I'll also say, if you guys go to the Freethink story, you can see, I think you can tap to Kennen's 2 accounts. So you can do that, and my accounts too, of course, Daisy Robinton. It's been so great chatting with you, Kennen, and so great with everyone in the audience. Thanks for your questions and everything, and look forward to another time soon.
Yeah, sounds awesome. Thanks for having me. I hope this was helpful.
Yeah, bye guys.
Bye.